Hello and welcome to this very brief video explaining how we've changed naval combat in the book A Complete Guide to Nautical Campaigns. Now, traditionally, the way that nautical combat would take place is that you would have your two ships on a map, and these ships would float around, doing whatever it is that they do, and then sail towards one another at a certain speed as determined by the speed of the ship. Now, that is all good and well in short-range practice, but over long distances it starts to become a problem. There's also an issue with the fact that ships can see each other at sea over a distance of roughly 5,500 feet, or just under that, or around about a mile. You have weapons on board both ships that have a range of over 1,000 feet in terms of making attacks, and suddenly when your ships are moving at 60 or 70 feet around, 1,000-foot gap to try and close using those kinds of mechanics becomes problematic, and for 10 to 15 rounds you've just got two ships sailing towards each other, rolling with disadvantage as they try and attack each other. It can lead to some interesting decision making, but we felt that it could be done in a faster way if we abstracted the entire thing. And so that's how we came up with the scale range tracker. Now, this is a representation in terms of feet, starting at 800 feet, that's here next to this red arrow, and then dropping off quite quickly to 400, 300, 200, 150, and then 0 feet. And the idea is that you abstract the distance. Now, this is going to take some fudging when it comes to character movement, but again, the idea is, what's the principle behind ship combat? Is it to simulate the way that the ships work, or is it to have fun and engaging naval combat systems? So that's the route we've taken. So the system that's employed within the book is the moment the two ships are aware of each other, so this ship, for example, and this ship here, the Second Chance, the moment that they are aware of the two of each other at sea, perception checks are made and so on to make sure that that happens. They can then decide if they're going to engage in hostile actions. Now, there's nothing stopping the players from deceiving the other ship that they are friendly and sailing closer and closer and closer, and you would keep track of the approximate distances using, again, the scale movement tracker. So if they're at 400 feet, you then realize that mangonels are firing now in in medium range for them, so they're no longer a disadvantage. Ballista, it's a disadvantage. And then as they get closer and closer and closer, eventually nothing is a disadvantage, and personal weapons and spells and things start to become effective at this kind of range. Longbows, of course, are 600 feet, so that's quite a good difference. Our system, the moment that combat is initiated, one determines the heading of the wind. So you roll a d8 and you work out whether the wind is to the north, the west, perhaps it's southwesterly, whatever direction it might be in. The ship that initiates combat decides whether they are sailing with the wind, as this case would indicate, or whether they're sailing against the wind, however they want to choose to determine their speed. Speed does still play a part in this, but you're going to see how in a little bit speed is not the only thing that you need to worry about. So once you've determined the wind direction, you determine the weather conditions. If it's raining, of course, that will reduce the efficacy of ranged weapons. It will reduce visibility. If there's heavy fog about, of course, that's going to have a much bigger effect. If it's a clear, calm day, well, that's absolutely wonderful. But if it's a doldrum, if there's no wind whatsoever, then sailing ships are going to suffer. And in the book, there are certain races that don't use sails for locomotion. They don't use sails to move forward. They use other things, and so the weather is not such a major effect on them. They have other things that they have to worry about. The ships then initiate ship's orders, and there's another video where we're going to talk about how we've improved, or expanded upon, I should say, the actions that one can take in the game. We've expanded it from effectively 5 or so orders right the way up to over 40 of them, as a matter of fact. So the ships start to move closer to one another, firing weapons as they so choose. Now, using the mechanic that was established beforehand, you can target various components: the hull, the helm, the sails, the other weapons on the vessel, or whatever your particular decision is there, you play that out as you normally would. None of that has been changed. Ballista and Mangonel now draw, however, their ability score from your crew quality score on the ship, not a fixed valued regardless of what you're using. So we've done that where the crew quality can be improved. We'll talk about that in another video, but the crew will now engage. At the end of the round, so once all of the orders have been given, and once all of the effects have been resolved that would affect those ships, that's then when speed is calculated. Now, if the two ships are in pursuit, if one ship is chasing the other, or the other is not trying to evade, let me say it like that, then if the pursuing ship has a greater speed than the pursued ship, but it's not double, it's just greater, the ships are moved closer together by 1 increment on the movement tracker. So in one round, the distance has gone from 800 feet to 400 feet. This has major ramifications. Spells, there's certain spells that might now have range, longbows have range, so things can start to get a little bit more dramatic a lot quicker. Imagine if we'd started this combat at 800 feet and the two ships have got a movement speed of, let's say, 40 feet around, even at double speed, or using a mechanic that was postulated in one of the rule books, moving at 3 or 4 times that speed. They may have only closed that gap by 200 feet, give or take. Now they've jumped forward by 400 foot. If the two ships are sailing towards one another, however, they've decided that they're going to embrace this idea, then the tracker moves again an extra movement. So now we've jumped a good 500 feet forward because the crews have indicated they want to fight. The players, in other words, have said, yes, we want to fight if they are the ones that are being pursued. So this greatly speeds up the combat again. Of course, if one of the ships, the pursuing ship, if its speed is double that of the ship that it is following or that is sailing towards it, this will move it even further. So it seems crazy to say that the ship has gone from 800 feet to suddenly 200 feet. But think of it not in terms of 6-second rounds. Think of it in terms of the ships are sailing towards each other. They've got full sail or full steam or full paddle or whatever the mechanic is of the ship's operations. They are sailing towards each other. They want to get involved in combat. Again, the entire intent of the new system is to make naval combat fun and engaging, and if that means that the players want to steer their ship directly towards the enemy, and the enemy are good for a fight, why not get there faster? Why be bound and constrained by rules that require you to plot it out over a period of rounds? The ships can continue to do whatever it is that they're doing. Of course, if the ships are sailing away from each other and the speed of the pursuing ship is greater, then of course the ship is going to move closer. If the pursuing ship, however, is less and the fleeing ships is greater, and this originally was at 800 feet, if this ship has a greater speed than the pursuing ship, it moves out of range, and effectively combat is broken. They're no longer in combat. The pursuing ship now has to make various survival checks to be able to spot this ship and to see where they're going and to try and follow if they want to. So it's a very, very simple system. Of course, as the ships get closer and closer to one another, it doesn't really matter what their heading is. The important thing is the wind. If they're sailing with the wind, they gain a burst in speed. If they're sailing against it, they lose speed. If they're sailing contrary or perpendicular to it, it doesn't really matter. They're attacking with the wind, whatever the situation might be. It's a comparison of the speeds of the two. They're firing away at one another. They're trying to do as much damage as they can. This system, we feel, adds a significant amount of weight onto attacking the sails of the ship because there are only so many rounds and each round is critical to the ship's speed. It adds to destroying the weaponry rather than just going for the hull straight away. So that's one of the fundamental differences that we introduce, is the scaled tracker movement and the effects of positioning the ships in such a way that we don't really care about how far they are from one another, aside from the fact that they're going to allow at closer range more spells and things to go off, and that closer range is going to happen a lot faster than under normal circumstances. Once the ships have reached zero distance, they are effectively abutting one another, and now boarding can happen. And boarding takes place in a very different set of circumstances with the second set of rules that we've added in, where the crew quality is very, very important in terms of how those two ships are going to pair up and whether the one ship will be able to successfully board the other or not. Now, for underwater combat, we have a different scale. We determined that underwater combat, I don't have an example here at the moment, but for underwater combat, the range is not 800 feet. Visibility underwater is very, very different. There's lots of particulate in the water, which prevents you from seeing very far. So the scale is actually halved. It's a lot less, but underwater weapons have a lot less range. You're not firing mangonels and ballista underwater, you're firing harpoons and things like that. So the range is significantly less. This was also a balancing act because ships on the surface have a natural disadvantage when fighting ships below the surface. You fire a weapon into the water is naturally going to absorb a lot of that energy of that weapon, and can you actually see the ship underneath you? So, by changing around the scales and things, underwater ships certainly do have an advantage, but they've got to get a lot closer to their enemies in order to do that. And of course, we've got a lot of ship's equipment that has been added to the book, where surface ships can now drop the equivalent of depth charges and have chains with spikes on them, all kinds of deterrents for aquatic attack. So, that's, in a nutshell, what we've done to make naval combat a lot faster in terms of engagement.